Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm going to be concluding the book There's Something You Should Know About Leroy. These are the final chapters, so 3 chapters to go. I'm at chapter 22. Alright, so welcome back. Zande and Kim Kim are saying welcome back. And we're going to be finishing up this book, so we're going to find out what is it about Leroy that we should know, and what's going to be happening to Cheyenne and Prudence and the others. So let's go. Chapter 22. The dark gray Mercedes-Benz cruised down Gloucester Avenue with all the tinted windows rolled up. It slowed as it approached the posh new restaurant, Le Gourmet Guru, and pulled into the parking lot. A man emerged wearing a pair of slack denim shorts and a polo shirt. He was in his mid-40s with rough-hewn features that lent a crude handsomeness to his face. He wore a small goatee, but that was all. He opened the door of the car with the grace of practice, but everything else about him gave the impression of power. A timid security guard walked over to the car and gestured awkwardly. "Morning, Mr. Slick." Real swashbuckler. He feigned a salute. The man nodded, smiled condescendingly, and swaggered around to the other side to open the door for his lady. She stepped out. She wore a white mini dress that flared a few inches above her knees and white leather sandals. She could not have been more than 70. She wore a slender chain of white gold with a diamond encrusted pendant in the shape of a C and a matching bracelet. The very light makeup and the way she bundled her hair up to the side complemented her flawless complexion. The couple entered Le Gourmet Guru and were ushered to their favorite spot, a table on the patio overlooking the Doctor's Cave beach. It was mid-afternoon. The sea was azure and a cool zephyr was giving everything a quick frisk. People were on the beach, frolicking. Their laughter could be heard from the patio. Their merriment was contagious. The lady laughed to herself. Slick placed his hand over hers. She stretched out her fingers on the beige linen tablecloth. "So, you like the bracelet, Cheyenne?" She smiled and nodded dreamily. "I told him to make it just like the chain, and I ordered an anklet too to match. You know, only the best for my girl. Just don't try that stunt again, Slick, or I'm leaving this time for good." "Hey babe, don't air our dirty laundry in public, eh?" He smiled but looked around, scanning the patio and the main dining hall. It was in his habit to scan. It had become second nature in his line of business, just as it was second nature to run his hand over the revolver which he carried in his waist. He did so now. "You did the one thing you said you would never do. You hit me, Slick." "Okay, Cheyenne, I was wrong. I said I was wrong, babe. I'm just glad I didn't ruin your skin." He stroked her legs, which were even now more exposed because she was seated. "And look, babe, you did the one thing I told you never to do. All I did was ask you about your damn women. Don't. You're my woman. They're just whores to me. Just part of the job, Shine. Never cross that line. I told you, never ask me about those whores. I'm a businessman. They're part of the business. You're different. You're my lady." She looked away. The waiter entered and was serving appetizers. Pumpkin soup. Cheyenne was becoming a little disturbed, even with the frolicking going on down below. The waiter smiled at Slick. They always seemed to make extra efforts to appease him. Word did get around. He was a man that it would be in your best interest to appease, if possible. I'll be back with the entree in a little while, the waiter grinned. Slick nodded, dismissing the waiter. He despised subservience, but his business relied on it. Cheyenne, one more thing while we're at it. He put a firmer grip on her hand, not so much to show his power, but his strength. Her slim fingers were almost completely covered by his. What's this with you nagging me to let you have my baby? What's gotten to your head? You said I was your woman. So, you're 17. Why on earth would I want to ruin your perfect body with a baby? Slick, 5 other women have babies for you. I love you. Why can't I share that with you? I told you not to ask me about those whores. Cheyenne, I want your body intact. You got that? She looked away again. Cheyenne, you got that? She nodded reluctantly. Good. Don't bring it up again. No, just relax. We're in public. You know I don't like to see you like this. Just look at this bracelet, huh? Grilled lobster in coconut sauce served with potato salad. Compliments of the manager, who had come out on the patio to greet Slick himself. He flashed a mischievous look at Shine. One of your daughters, Mr. Slick? Slick chuckled at the compliment. You know how it goes, Mr. Hamilton. They say when you stay around the young, you tend to stay young. An old foot like you, doing good for yourself, said Mr. Hamilton, as if they shared a secret joke, at the expense of other middle-aged men who couldn't afford to associate with the young and were therefore doomed. Don't let me interrupt your dining, though, Mr. Slick, but swing by the house later and we'll talk, huh? Sure thing, said Slick. By the way, thumbs up on the new eatery, eh? I like it. Very nice ambience. You'll soon have a chain of them now, huh? He figured Mr. Hamilton needed a new batch. He never had trouble collecting his money from Mr. Hamilton. Business was business. Only serious businessmen should do business, was Slick's philosophy. Wimps shouldn't take up what they couldn't manage, or they would get hurt. Slick adjusted his piece. He liked to adjust it, touch it like he touched himself as he watched Cheyenne sprawled naked across the bed when she had had enough and he still wanted more. He adored her, but she could not satisfy him completely. He was voracious. A man like him needed so many more avenues to unleash his power. By the time they left the restaurant, it was past 3 o'clock. Slick drove back down Gloucester Avenue, past the quaint guest houses and upscale restaurants, the gazebo-style delicacies tucked neatly behind hedges. Finally, he reached the city center of Montego Bay and turned onto Barnett Street, passed a few exits, then finally turned left and drove down a narrow lane. Slick took it and tossed it. 2 men approached as if on cue. They handed him a parcel. Slick took it and tossed it onto the back seat, seeming not to care that it contained $350,000. When? was all he said to the men. They told him, Friday at Pier 1. Slick nodded vaguely and drove off. Cheyenne stretched out in the passenger seat. She had taken off her sandals. He reached over to play in her hair with his left hand while he kept the steering wheel steady with his right. He was chewing on cashew nuts, his favorites. Baby Cheyenne, he smiled at her. She returned the gesture. Why you want to ruin your body with a baby? Oh, so now you're bringing it up. He chuckled. I'm just saying, you're young and fresh. Stop thinking about those things, okay? Just keep taking the pills I got you, and don't let us have another row, okay? I don't like when we quarrel, but I don't like when you go away and leave me. You were gone for almost a year. You know where I was. Of course I knew where you were. You can't hide from me, Shine. Don't ever think that you can hide from me. Anyway, everything worked out fine, and now we have a whole new base in Portmore. Good work, Rookie. She twitched her mouth. Whenever she did that, he couldn't tell if she was smiling or frowning. But she was beautiful even when she frowned. That boy was in the hospital for a while. Almost went mad. What if I had sold him the real stuff? She chuckled. Slick grinned. So, how about that Prudence chick? Someone we could recruit to shuttle a few tubes up north? Prudence? Swallow? She acts like she can't even suck dick. Slick hissed his teeth. She has a US visa? Could line up one for her? No, one of them goody-goody type. She wouldn't do it. Goody-goody and opening her black pussy for everyone to see? What? Cause she does it in a studio, she thinks she's better than any other whore? Can't stand chicks with double standards. Pick a side and stick to it. He loaded up some more cashew nuts. She says it's tastefully done, Cheyenne said mockingly. Well, if she comes around, I always need some recruits. They had long left the city center and were blazing down the highway towards Ironshore, where Slick had his mansion, one of his mansions. They sped along the coast and the sea whizzed past in a haze of blue. The afternoon was sultry. She had felt sleepy in the car, but back home in Ironshore, walking through the familiar rooms and feeling good to be back, had perked her up, and she decided to go back to spend some time with Slick on the deck. He was reclining and sipping cognac, still in his shorts and polo shirt, but barefooted. Cheyenne had removed her dress and lay outstretched in a lounge chair in a two-piece bikini. She wanted to soak up the last rays of the afternoon sun. She signaled to Slick to come and apply suntan oil onto her back. You come, babe, he signaled to her. She pouted. Cheyenne, come over here, babe, he said again. She stood and went reluctantly to him. She kneeled and turned her back to him. His hands were huge and rough, but he applied the oil gently. He suddenly burst out chuckling to himself. What? What you said about Prudence, like when you just started, Cheyenne? Gagging all the time like a little pussycat. He chuckled uncontrollably. Almost made me lose my cool one time. Poor little pussycat. She cut her eyes at him. He was becoming aroused. He massaged the oil onto her back, smoothed it onto her slender arms, which she had spread across the table. He was tall and strapping, even when seated. He eased her soft body over the patio table and slid into her, easing her bikini to the side. He slapped the side of her rump and pinched her, pumping gently. She was silent. That's my girl, that's my Cheyenne, he kept repeating. She said nothing, just moaned under his weight. That's my Cheyenne, he said again, releasing her. He exhaled deeply. She stood, adjusted her bikini and strolled over to the pool. He collapsed onto the chair after finishing his cognac. She dived in elegantly without so much as a splash, gently gliding through the water. She did a few strokes underwater, holding her breath for as long as she could, then bobbed up and floated as if she was lifeless. He had always loved this about her, the way she swam smoothly like a manta ray, her effortless glide through the water. She spent most of her time in the pool whenever she stayed at Ironshore. My Cheyenne, Slick whispered to himself. He stroked his piece. Chapter 23. Where's my piece? Asked Cheyenne. He used a flick of his head to indicate that it was in the glove compartment on the passenger side. She opened the compartment and removed the gun, fingering it, examining the sheen against the sunlight. It had been loaded, ready for action. They had left Ironshore and were heading towards Falmouth. This operation can't take long, 10 minutes maximum. So don't waste time if he's putting up a fight, said Slick. Just make sure he signs all the papers putting the properties in your name. Make sure he does that first. Here, my lawyers already set up everything so it looks legit. He had the tone of a brigadier general briefing his privates. He handed her a legal-sized envelope with 5 documents, all in triplicate. That old fool really thinks you're going to marry him. Hot girl like you, don't waste any time, Cheyenne. He has to sign the papers first. If things go smoothly, just leave it at that, and Luther will deal with him another time. But if he starts acting weird then, take him out if you have to, just like you did that fool in Westmoreland. Tell me something I don't know. She returned the gun to the compartment. He glanced over at her and chuckled with satisfaction. He had taught her the ropes. If you were going to learn, might as well learn from the best. He had met her on the very Doctor's Cave beach one Friday afternoon when she was playing truant with her friends. She had been 14 years old. He had taken her to his house in Ironshore, and she had been with him since, except for some months ago when she fled from the car while he was out and about. He hadn't chased her. He had put Luther, his main muscle, on her trail. Slick knew she belonged to him. Long run, short catch, he had told himself. He looked at her now and shook his head. He reached across and stroked her chin. You sure you can trust this Leroy fellow? Asked Slick. He spat through the window of the car. He needed some cashew nuts. Cheyenne hissed and rolled her eyes. He's a fucking sap. I have that wuss under my belt. You didn't give him any of my things though, he teased, pinching her cheeks with his thick thumb. It doesn't seem like he likes pussy. So, how can you be sure that he'll go with the plan? Don't worry, I'm sure. I have my ways. Slick shook his head again. The old man has $500,000 stashed somewhere in the back room. I'll get him to tell me where it is. I asked Leroy to make sure no one else is at home. He's taking them all to the beach or something. I don't give a fuck where. They drove a few more miles in silence. Occasionally, Slick reached over to stroke her face and smiled at him, and she smiled at him. It was the only communication they had sometimes. They approached Falmouth. It was a town they always zipped through because Cheyenne was glad to see the back of it. A boring little town, she would always comment as she watched the people ebb by. So little to offer anyone. How do they live here? I would die the first day. But she loved Ocho Rios. They sauntered slowly through Ocho Rios at her request. Luxury hotels, cruise ships in the harbor, a sizzling nightlife. She hoped one day to live in Ocho Rios. Slick had promised to buy a house there. He had a house in Ironshore, a house in Forest Hills, and an apartment in New Kingston. What was to stop him from buying a house in Ocho Rios? We're going to drop off the weed at Biggs, then drive to Forest Hills and pick up the other car, the Mazda that Luther drives, he explained. Luther will take you to Greater Portmore. Just do your thing quickly and we get it over with. Luther will take you back to Forest Hills. She wanted to ask him what he would be doing meanwhile, but he had told her never to ask him that question. I'm a businessman, Shine. a very delicate business. The less you know, the safer it is for you. She couldn't understand that logic sometimes. Cheyenne had wanted him to stop in Ocho Rios so they could have lunch at a restaurant in one of the fine hotels there. She had sworn she had worn her yellow chiffon dress for just that eventuality. But Slick had said no. When he was in the frame of mind for business, nothing could entice him away from it. Not even the satisfaction of showing off Cheyenne to the residents and guests of the resort town. So they drove right through Ocho Rios. And always, later, whenever Cheyenne reflected to herself and ran through the events of that day, she told herself that had they stopped, they would not have run into Inspector Lloyd, or rather, he would not have run into them. But little did she know that he had been on their trail all along. Slick had caught the rake. He had been highly suspicious of the beige Toyota Camry that had seemed to be on his trail for about 2 miles, headed down the stretch into Ocho Rios. He had pulled into the gas station to see if he would shake the pursuit, and when the beige car whizzed by without incident, Slick convinced himself that he had made a wrong evaluation. But in this line of business, you cannot be over-vigilant. He waited for a good 10 minutes before pulling out of the gas station without explaining his trepidation to Cheyenne, and she didn't ask. They had sat in the car and he stroked her face and she smiled back. Inspector Lloyd was in top gear. The mind of the criminal was no match for the man bent on enforcing the law. He had nonchalantly driven past without as much as a casual glance at the dark gray Mercedes-Benz that he had been trailing for some time. He had his men strategically positioned along all exits out of Ocho Rios, 4 radio cars and 10 armed men in total. The route to Orocabessa was manned by his trusted second-in-command, Sergeant Thompson, a man who had actually been his squaddy donkey years ago, and who, as luck would have it, had steadily worked his way up the ranks, and they had rendezvoused in Portmore. The inspector himself insisted on manning the main route out of Ocho Rios, the preferred route that would take you through Fern Gully and eventually Walker's Wood and beyond. But the inspector had no intention of making things get that far. His plan was to intercept the Mercedes on Milford Road way before the entrance to Fern Gully. 3 of the 4 cars had been positioned along this stretch because his innards told him strongly that was the route the villains would take. And it was. "Is that a roadblock up ahead?" asked Cheyenne. Slick didn't answer. His own innards had confirmed his fears, and he was in war mode. No time for chit-chat. 2 cars up in front of him had stopped, and the policemen were approaching his car. He could not swerve or reverse. He stopped the car, and with the reflexes of a Navy SEAL, removed his gun from his waist and opened the car door, at the same time barking orders to Cheyenne, who was dazed. "Grab your piece, get out," shouted the kingpin. She did as he commanded. "The cemetery, come!" He grabbed her hand and darted into the nearby Ocho Rios cemetery, on the left-hand side of the stretch. Inspector Lloyd was already in hot pursuit. The unkempt cemetery was vacant, except for a few goats, who scrambled at the excitement. The inspector had good aim of Slick, and several times could have taken him. But as he hopped across the tombstones, Cheyenne kept bobbing into the way. Cheyenne dropped her gun as she ran. He didn't necessarily want to shoot her, but if it could be avoided. But then, it couldn't be avoided. In an act of sheer selfishness and cowardice that the inspector had rarely seen in all his umpteen years, Slick grabbed Cheyenne and, using her body as a human shield, opened fire on the officers even as he scanned the area for an exit. The gunfire was rapid and pounding. 2 officers got hit. The inspector was one of them. He had taken a bullet to the shin. 2 villains got hit. 1 was dead. The inspector's bullets had riddled Slick's body, but even in his gruesome last moments, he pulled Cheyenne's body towards him, refusing to relinquish his hold on her. He had been shot in the shoulder and abdomen. In the months that followed, she would refuse any visits from Maud, and even after her sentencing, she would say nothing to no one. She would serve her 20 years in silence. The inspector made a point of frowning upon the hero's welcome that the media doted on him back in Kingston. He refused the flowers and cards with a flourish, though his wife secretly stashed them for posterity. He expressed no intention of making use of the 2 months recuperation leave assigned to him, arguing that it was only a gunshot wound to the leg after all. Nothing to write home about. But he did allow himself to be propped up on a pillow the first few days as his wife spoon-fed him pumpkin soup and soursop juice to revive his strength. Leroy went to visit him at his house. "Sorry about your leg, Constable." The inspector pretended to be annoyed by the unnecessary attention. "Ah, this little mosquito bite," he said, brushing off the comment. "In any case, I couldn't let them get to Stubbs. Better me than the old fart. By the way, Royster, thanks for the one-up. You were right about Cheyenne after all. She fooled even me." "She fooled even herself," chuckled Leroy, but in a sad way. "I hate to think what would have happened if they had gotten to Stubbs, even though we warned the old man in advance and evacuated the house anyway. But still I shudder to think. Those 2 were heavily armed. And to think they had been supplying the cocaine and weed all these months." He shook his head. That girl, boy." Leroy sat at the edge of the bed, which was usually a no-no with the inspector, one of his pet peeves. But since he was in convalescence, and since it was Leroy who had really saved the day, he let it slide. "Hey, Royster, you think he really has that $500,000 stashed away?" Leroy chuckled again, this time a happy one. "Old Stubbs may very well have $5 million with all those properties, money coming in monthly, hardly any overheads and no one to really spend it on. A lonely old man. Could be, but then again, could be not. He and Indian do drink a lot and buy lottery tickets like crazy." They both laughed heartily, and the inspector felt a sharp pain run up his leg, but he pretended it was just an itsy-bitsy tingling. He had company. Later, he would ask his wife to massage it gently. But with instincts as sharp as his, how could he have missed, though? She had him fooled even from the get-go, straight down to the goal. He looked Leroy square in the face, man to man. "It's not true what they say about you, Royster. Not true at all." "About me? What do they say about me?" Leroy seemed amused. "That you're a blasted wimp," shouted the inspector and burst out laughing. The pain again. "When did you first catch on to her?" "It's like there was always something," reflected Leroy. "No matter what she did or said, just a gut feeling. And then the more I watched and listened, the more it was confirmed. She thought she really had me too. But I'm glad because I got her to let down her guard, and she confided her plans to me. And all I did was pass it on to you, the right man for the job." "Ah, you saw what I didn't see. The eye of the artist, I guess. We are trained to discern what's real from what's fake." He chuckled. And that is the end of chapter 23. Chapter 24. "If you're going to be a world-class lead guitarist, you're going to be needing one of these," said Leroy, and he told her she could open her eyes now. She screamed, "A Tom Anderson guitar, 6 strings, whoa!" She immediately fretted the strings even before the guitar was fully in her hands. Leroy helped her to get the straps around her neck and back. "Acoustic, nice clear sound, I love it, Lee, thanks. I've always wanted to get you one, been saving up forever." "A million thanks, I owe you a million." "Some free concert tickets will do when you start touring after your scholarship." "Imagine that, Lee, they finally came through for me." "I always knew you would get it. You deserve it, Prue. Just wear some clothes in the snow, right?" She giggled. He pulled her close to him. The hard frame of the guitar pressed against his body. He wanted to make love to her again. Last night had been the first time he had held Prudence in his arms the way he had always wanted to. Not on impulse or on the spur of a jealous rage. Not seeking validation in the coincidence of having seen her naked time and time again. Not because anyone thought they should or everyone suspected they must have. It had happened gently, carefully, because Prudence and Leroy had wanted to consummate the love they had carried for so long on their own terms. "So, will you stay tonight?" he had asked, stroking her cheeks, ruffling her woolly plaits. "I really want you to stay." "You know I'm a virgin, right?" "I know." He chuckled because he was almost a virgin himself, so inexperienced and unsure of what to do, but letting his body guide him. He told her of his experience of being molested at 11 years old, why he had been so reluctant to let her or anyone else across that threshold. "I guess you're one of those who don't think a male can be raped or feel violated, eh, Prue?" "Nah, men can definitely be violated." She allowed his arms to wrap themselves around her. For a while, they stood in the center of the room, feeling safe and unrushed, feeling that they had an entire lifetime to get to know each other. He kissed her, covering her lips with his mouth. On instinct, then, gently sucking on her lower lip until at last his tongue entered her mouth and devoured it. A kiss that lasted forever and ended too soon, as gentle as it was strong, as slow as it was urgent. His mind was ablaze with colors, her mind infused with sound. The afterglow was a pleasant contortion of arms and legs, each clinging tightly to the other for fear of losing their bearings. The artist and the musician in agreement at last. Miss Busybody quiet and subdued for once. She rested her head on his chest and listened to the muffled pounding, something in there ticking, a clock being reset to a cadence for 2. Andy held her head close to him, running his fingers through her nappy plaits, aroused by the texture and the strength. 7 weeks had passed since Cheyenne's incarceration and Benjamin's death, a synchrony of events that had left Maud reeling and left Prudence with a cluster of sorrow that only the constant strumming of her guitar could quiet. She questioned everything and everyone except the 6 strings of her guitar. "I can't even call her shy, not even in